this was never your home.
Right.
Like,
what made you think?
Yeah, like we were created to be like outside the mainstream. Like we're not going to toe that line. We're not going to be anti-Zionists when we aren't. But like, don't. Sorry, you're not comfortable. Go away.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
That's like where I, Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get it.
Ah! Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
So much more.
Oh my God. The not fragile ones are fine. It's just the fragile ones.
Trying to keep myself in the
Okay. All right, I'd like to begin. So if you're making your way in, find a seat in the front row. That means you can talk for like another 30 seconds.
What?
Okay. Is that not the most rabbinic beginning?
Bang on something.
That's if it's Rosh Chodesh. Welcome, everybody. I've spent a lot of time thinking about my opening remarks, many, many drafts, but I hadn't anticipated how difficult it is to pull people away from really good food. So I appreciate that you came in, and I assure you that the food will be there once we end. So thank you for being here for the inaugural Mercaz event. We are really excited by this. This has been something that Hannah Kaiser and I, where is Hannah? She's somewhere. It's something that we've been working on for the last 2 years and has been in my head for a lot longer than that. I've long wanted to have a forum for playing with the ideas that inspire me and the ideas that I know will inspire others, but there's not a real home for them in typical synagogue programming, even the unique programming that we've been able to do here. I knew that these ideas and this kind of programming deserve to have a home. And so thank you for being here for it. And that's really actually where Mercaz began, by us sitting around talking about what interested us, what was meaningful to us, this essay that we read, that experience, this interaction, this thing that we saw. And Mercaz had to be created here because this community, Rodfei Zedek, has been sharing their truth. In our programming, we've harnessed the power of storytelling as a gateway to understanding Judaism, but equally important, or maybe more important, to understand ourselves. And we wanted to expand the community with whom we search for that meaning. The Rodfei Zedek community has been uniquely transformed by its search for meaning and its willingness to broadcast that search in here, in this spot. And that search has revealed that our stories, our voices occupy the blank space between the inherited words of our tradition. And something that I learned in this time is that in order for us to embrace Torah, Torah had to embrace us. And that begins by sharing who we are. Mercaz is where we center community around ideas, people around ideas, for the sake of personal but also communal discovery. And that discovery will lead not only to us being better Jews, better members of the Jewish community, but simply better humans. Our schools, our synagogues, our camps, our Beit Midrashes, our places of study are not meant to be islands, to be refuges from the world, but should be arming us with the tools for making the world a better place beyond our own communities and giving us what we need to make the world beyond our Jewish community better. And those are the goals that Mercaz is setting out to achieve. And we knew that we needed to begin with voices that are familiar to us, because if we're going to be making the world a better place, we need to know who are the voices that we should be listening to make that world better. And we have them here today. So thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being those voices. This is our first in a series of looking to Jewish leaders who are shaping the Jewish landscape today and reshaping the landscape for the future. I wanted to facilitate a conversation so that we get to hear what it takes to lead, what it takes to have vision, and how to create and sustain a community of vision, a community of meaning in a cluttered Jewish landscape of many institutions that are not as successful. Camp Ramah, SVARA, Mishkan, simply put, are doing it right. They're places of integrity, of depth, and of true community, and not the way that we so often use that word community so that it has been watered down beyond currency. They're places of real community. I wanted to be in conversation with Jacob, Benay, and Lizzie. They're not panelists, but we're going to be in a conversation together so that we can better understand how they became the Jewish leader that they are, how the institutions that they're leading came to be, so that we can be better members of our own community, and how we can make our communities better suited to the search for meaning. And since I'm holding the mic, one of the things that I did not want to do is give long bios, believe that each one of them is really distinguished. But if you need to know their bio, there's a QR code on the pamphlet. If you didn't get one, they're outside. But I'll just give a very brief intro to each person. Jacob Cytryn is the executive director of Camp Ramah and my old camp counselor. We're very close. We're very close in age. I feel lucky that Jacob is the director of Camp Ramah. I told Jacob before that there were 5 of us, and I just saw a 6th that went to rabbinical school, I think, with the real aim of sitting in his chair. But Camp Ramah is lucky that they have Jacob as the director, and I feel really blessed to have you as a friend. Benay Lappe is the founder and Rosh Yeshiva of SVARA. There are a lot of wonderful teachers in this room, but Benay is the teacher of all teachers. She possesses the Torah that we all need to hear, and if you have not been Benay's student, that needs to be one of your takeaways from today, how you can find your way to Benay's Beit Midrash. You might want to ask other people, because I'm a bit biased. Benay is also my aunt. But I assure you, you're going to find out that I'm right. Lizzi Heydemann is the founder and head rabbi of Mishkan. Lizzi is really redefining what it means to be a rabbi in the communities that we look to for guidance and leadership. And Lizzi, you're just an inspiration to me, so it's really special to have you here. And Lizzi grew up in Hyde Park, and I believe her parents are in the front row, and her in-laws are beloved members of this community. So thank you all very much for being here, and just really excited to be able to kick off this dream of mine with all of you. So I'll begin with the startups on that end. I'm interested in, start with you, Lizzi, in if there was a Jewish idea or a piece of wisdom that really inspired you to be a rabbi, and then once you were there, was there what you saw in the Jewish world that led you to to create Mishkan? What was not being met?
Oh, thank you. Hello? Okay. Thanks, David. This is so fun. I also just, there's something I appreciate about the casualness of this. Like, very often when there are panels or formal things, it's like, this is Rabbi Benay Lappe and Rabbi Lizzi Heydemann, and it's fine because that is our title, but I like being able to call you David, and it's fun to be able to be Lizzie up here. And it helps me kind of get into the headspace of like, who was that, 18-year-old who decided like, maybe I don't want to go straight to college. Maybe I am on a spiritual quest. Maybe there's something for me beyond, the path that, just like I went to the lab school, by the way, here in the neighborhood. The professional path that leads away from spirituality and make spirituality kind of something you do on the side, but instead to make spirituality and spiritual leadership the center of my life. And when people ask, why did I become a rabbi? The answer is, I don't know, because I was called, which is not a word that I feel like liberal Jews use very often because it feels so kind of God as anthropomorphic character who designates you and says, you go on a mission, like to Abraham, go forth from your home, go on this mission. But like I knew very early on in college that this is what I needed to do with my life. But the principles, the Jewish ideas that animate Mishkan and that have animated my rabbinate from before I was a rabbi, the email signature I had since I had an email address has been from Psalm 100, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha. Serve God with joy. And I sometimes translate God differently. The one, the beloved, the mystery of the universe, Gaia, but Dr. Ron Wolfson, who taught at the American Jewish University, he did a bunch of studies with megachurches and asked participants in megachurches like to describe in a few words your church experience. And he said the first word was always joy. And then he did the same study with synagogues. You're laughing. Why are you laughing? And he did not discover the same results. And I grew up in the Reform movement. I grew up at KAM here, and I had an extraordinary song leader just kind of by chance. I also happened to overlap. His name is Andrew Rayfeld, and now he's the head of HUC in New York. But Rabbi Arnold Jacob Wolf, may his memory be a blessing, and Max Janowski was the cantor for a couple years. Like, I grew up in a synagogue with a lot of joy, actually. And I realized that was the exception to the rule. That was not the rule. And the more people I talked to as I went through college and then rabbinical school, and then began to talk to friends about maybe moving home and thinking about what kind of community I might like to join, not start, but join. And I would say, like, I would ask my friends who grew up with me, who lived in Chicago, where do you go? And they, for shul? For synagogue? Nowhere. Why? Because I, at this point, was very deeply invested in the Jewish community. I was working at ICAR in Los Angeles, a community very much founded at the intersection of joy, spirituality, and social justice. And I would say, well, there's got to be a place like that in Chicago, right? And, just crickets. And so I realized that was the place that had the space for the kind of Jew that I was, the kind of rabbi that I was. So that principle is very important. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. And I really try and create every experience, including Yom Kippur, including, like certain Jewish holidays don't lend themselves to joy. I wouldn't try to impose joy on Tisha B'Av. But I feel like there's an emotional essence of every holiday, of every Jewish experience that's trying, maybe you'll hear Rabbi Benay, say something to this effect, like every Jewish thing is trying to get you to feel a particular way or be a certain kind of person, and different holidays are different kind of booster shots for different kinds of experiences. And so that's what I want to do, is get to the essential core. And I think that's an adventure, and that's fun, and that is joyful, deeply joyful. And I guess the last thing is dor v'dor shav, like every generation
does its own thing and kind of needs its own thing. And the Chavurah movement back in the 60s and 70s was started by people who were bored of and unsatisfied with the synagogues, the big suburban synagogues that they had grown up in, but deeply yearned for spirituality and created, a whole movement of unaffiliated Chavurah style synagogues all over the country that, as they aged, became kind of more mainstream. And then the next generation needed to create their own things that were different from the way that they grew up. Not as some kind of stinging indictment necessarily on the way that they grew up, sometimes yes, but to change and tweak certain things that, left them wanting. And so I feel like Mishkan is part of that movement. We're part of a 7-community network called the Jewish Emergent Network, with ECAR in Los Angeles and The Kitchen in San Francisco, a bunch of other shows around the country. But we are by no means the only ones doing this. There are many emergent communities all around the country, animated, I think, by this kind of ethos, which is like not a critique, not a broad swath critique of the entire Jewish world, but just saying, I think we want to do it differently in our little space here, in our little Mishkan. The Mishkan was its own little traveling prayer, spirituality space in the desert for the Israelites back in the day. And it gave them a space to create holiness, community, spirituality against a backdrop of a very harsh world that didn't look and feel like the Mishkan looked and felt. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
Great. I'd love to email that email address. So Benay, what was the Jewish idea that inspired you to go into Jewish professional work, and what were you seeing that made you realize that you needed to create SVARA?
What led me to rabbinical school, and it was never my intention to be a rabbi. I'm still not sure I want to be a rabbi. But I wanted to know what rabbis know. So I thought, okay, that must be rabbinical school because that's where rabbis learn what they learn. And I read a book, Shoshana, by your dad, Rabbi Art Waskow, and in that book he said, every one of us who ever has or ever will identify as a Jew stood at Mount Sinai. We were all there, and I thought, oh my God, if I was at Mount Sinai, this whole thing is mine. And the rabbinical schools who don't take queer folk, and I had been an out gay activist for a decade, they're keeping the Torah that's mine from me. So it both motivated me to learn and to actually go into the closet for 6 years to get that Torah that had been mine when I stood at Mount Sinai. Okay, so that got me to rabbinical school. Then once I was there and learning Talmud through a queer lens, what jumped out at me were the stories of how the rabbis were overturning Torah when they felt that their lived life experience, their stories, told them that the Torah didn't quite get it right. And the concept of SVARA just blew me away. So SVARA is the word that I named my yeshiva after. It's a 2,000-year-old Aramaic term that lives in the legal tradition, but it is what animates the entire Jewish ethos. It is the idea of creative moral intuition informed by our stories, by our lives, that the tradition entrusts every one of us to believe in and which can overturn Torah when the two conflict. And when I learned that idea, I thought, what a mistake, what a travesty that nobody knows this term. Who knows this term? I wasn't even taught it in rabbinical school. Imagine in this country raising children, educating them, sending them to university, and never teaching them the word democracy. Why would you do that? Or justice, or equality? You would never try to raise up Americans without teaching them these fundamental concepts. yet this is what we had done. And it turned out that just 1% of Jews for the last 2,000 years have learned that term. Those who went to yeshiva, those who had been entrusted with the spiritual practice of Talmud study. And I realized that the most fundamental problem in our Jewish world that I wanted to fix was that Jews didn't feel trusted. They didn't feel that their tradition trusted them to know what was right. And until a lot of us have done the work we did, I think Judaism was a take it or leave it proposition. We thought it was fixed, unchanging, this is what it was. You either were willing to go along with it or you opted out. And that seemed like a very bad thing for the world, bad for Judaism, bad for all of us. And I wanted to help raise up a new generation of Jews who would realize that the tradition believed in them. And the yeshiva that I started was intended to take those who were most on the margins first, those who had lived life experiences that the tradition most needed to hear from, and say, hey, the tradition trusts you. Time to bring what you know to it to make it better.
Thank you. Jacob, a slightly different question. The first half is the same. What inspired your decision to be a Jewish leader and to go into Jewish professional work? But why were you the right person for Camp Ramah? I mean, SVARA and Mishkan, our start, Camp Ramah had existed for 60-something years before you took over. Why did you want that job, and why were you the right person for it?
If Lizzie was Abraham, who heard the call, I was Jonah, who in certain ways was like, nope, not hearing it. I always felt like I had access to Judaism, just to own cis, heterosexual, white male that likely had, part of it. I grew up in a conservative synagogue in New Orleans where I was inspired by a group of people who founded the shul as part of really a chavurah-inspired movement. Then as I moved into high school, for me, the real message of camp, I started at Camp Ramah, Wisconsin as a 10-year-old and never left, was that we could act like grown-ups and we could do our own stuff and we could make our own path. I felt that innately as a kid at camp, and then I began to live it out through leadership in USY as a teenager and then back at camp on staff. And about 20 years ago, a group of us were sitting around thinking about the nature of community at camp and Torah, and we came up with a pretty radical read of one of the most famous, often boring psukim, verses in all of the Torah, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. And so with respect to Hillel and Shammai and Jesus, we went in a different direction. And for us, we said maybe ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is not about human beings treating each other, but about building community. And we suggested, and what still for me very much resonates 20 years later, is this idea that in order to live in community, I need to be selfish, and I need to let you be selfish. I need to say, I have my needs, whatever they are, and I really need to articulate and delineate them. And then I need to recognize that things that are not my needs are negotiable. And hopefully a bunch of those are your needs. And building community together, and what we did at camp as a Rosh Hashanah, as a division head, which was the greatest job I will ever have, was about making space for these kids to name what do you need and what can you negotiate on. And in that negotiation, we found powerful community. Camp Ramah, Wisconsin was, it's a little murky. It's been a long time. the first summer at camp was 1947. We say that's when we were founded. I can't imagine it didn't happen in 46 or 45 or likely even earlier. And what happened is a group of conservative Jews, including Rabbi Ralph Simon here at this synagogue. Rabbi Simon's son was, according to lore, the first camper enrolled at Camp Ramah, Wisconsin in 1947. A group of committed Jews from the Midwest saw what was happening in Europe and said, this pipeline of Jewish leadership is gone. Jewish leadership in America in the first half of the 20th century is the story of immigration from Europe. That's the story. We didn't do homegrown leaders. And the founders of Camp Ramah, Wisconsin in the mid-40s said, we need to create a place to create homegrown leaders. And that, in effect, is still what we're doing at camp. Rabbi Minkus, some other people in the room as well, Rabbi Minkus is a product of that vision of Ralph Simon's and friends, lay leaders, donors, parents, rabbis, educators, right, 75 years ago. And I will say, as, right, I run a legacy institution 75 plus years in, and we have to figure out in every generation how to reinvent ourselves in ways that I kind of think those Chavurah minions wish they could have reinvented themselves too. And it's worth noting that as a legacy institution, it's easier to reinvent yourself when you're basically run by 18 to 23-year-olds. But our job is to, my job, and what I think makes me the right person for camp, at least the board thought so 6 years ago, is that I love Ramah, and I grew up at Ramah, and I never left Ramah, and it was about 10 years in the middle there where I wasn't sure that Ramah was the right place. And I was very much inspired by radical, newer organizations, the Wexner Fellowship, Encounter, American Jewish World Service, the Hillel at my college, a variety of other ways of thinking and ways of being in the Jewish world that really informed, that first of all made me feel like an outsider in my home at camp, and then informed my thinking about what it means to change and rejuvenate and energize that place. And that's what we do. And it means that, you know, every few years we have to figure out again, what is this generation of parents and this generation of college kids and this generation of teenagers, what do they need? And how do we keep fueling the future, like the ongoing Jewish Renaissance in American Jewish life, in a place that's been around for a long time?
Ooh, can I just jump in?
Jump in whenever.
I'm so inspired by what you're saying, Jacob. Okay, two things. One is what you're saying about the community you create. That's also what we noticed. Okay, the late Bell Hooks said, education, when it's done right, doesn't teach you how to create liberation in the world. It is a liberatory experience, right? So Judaism isn't going to work when people figure out how to use it to create a certain experience. It works when the experience in our spaces are it. So it sounds like that's what you're doing. And the other thing I wanted to jump in on was raising up these leaders. What do they need to know? That's one of my big questions. What do they need to know? And where are we going to send them? You know, I used to put a notch on my belt every time a SVARA would go off to rabbinical school. I go, yeah, we did it. They're going to do the thing. And lots of SVARA went off to rabbinical school. And nowadays, the SVARA who go off to rabbinical school sometimes leave because those rabbinical schools aren't the place anymore. And they're not learning what they need to learn for a Judaism that's going to look very different. They're not being taught by people who are living in the same universe. And they're not being set up to serve the communities that they want to serve, for which there's no financial model. So anyway, we have the same questions.
Yeah, look, this is a question later on David's list that we won't get to because of time, so I'll just put it out there. The rabbinic leadership crisis is the single most important crisis American Jews face today. Full stop. I'm actually not interested in embracing any other questions on that front. Global warming is the greatest crisis we face as human beings. Rabbis for Jews. And we are failing right now miserably. It's rabbis. Leadership's a bigger piece of this, but it's rabbis. And I say that as my father was a pulpit rabbi for 40 plus years in conservative Shoals. He had an amazing career. And I decided not to go to rabbinical school, part because my mother would have killed me because she didn't want me to live my father's life. My wife probably wouldn't have married me. There was real stuff there. And I've gone a different path. And Benay, my sense is we might disagree on some of the things about the rabbinical schools and whether they're salvageable. But one of the things that we're missing, to go back to evangelical Christianity, is like a sense of pastoral responsibility. There's a great group of young emerging rabbis, including Rabbi Minkus, who I helped raise in certain ways. And let me just be clear, the Ramah model was always a node in a complicated network of a variety of different institutions that would raise our kids to be leaders. And I hear scary things about the politics in America and about the world we live in and about what I sometimes think is an insistence on too many needs and not a braveness of saying, nope, that's actually a want. I know great rabbis who have said to me, I won't name their names, but I will quote them, we're not looking in red states. I'm not willing to look at a synagogue in a red state. These are young people starting families. They're dealing with consequences there that are behind me and my family. I don't know what it means to make those decisions, but Jews in Alabama need rabbis, and Jews in rural Wisconsin need rabbis, and Jews all over the place need rabbis. And we're not doing a good enough job right now, and the institutions that run these rabbinical schools own a good part, at least, of the responsibility here. We're not doing a good enough job creating those people to serve the Jews. And I like to think that our community model is what people like David and others have taken from camp as they then move on. Because yeah, we teach text. We teach Torah at camp. You don't learn SVARA at camp. You learn joyful Judaism in an artifice at camp. You don't learn how to live it every week, right? Going from funerals to baby namings to smachot to rallies, the way that Mishkan, runs their shul and many of our other synagogues. So, that for me is the question that all of us need to be dealing with, and that donors and lay leaders need to get fully invested in. But yeah, I share that.
I don't know. Thank you for bringing that up. If there wasn't a rabbi shortage, and there are many liberal congregations across the country who have been looking for a rabbi for years, and it revealed not only are people not going into the pulpit, but people are no longer going to rabbinical school. And a member here recently sent me an article by Shira Tolushkin in The Atlantic, which really put this question back on the list. There's no Mercaz without this question, just full disclosure. So I'm interested in your perspective on the rabbi shortage. Is it a problem? Where does the problem lie? Just your general thoughts. Yeah, Lizzie.
There are a lot of people with a lot of theories on this question. I recently heard Yehuda Kurtzer, who's one of the president of the North American side of the Shalom Hartman Institute, say that he thinks kind of the polarity between excellence on the one side and complete sort of inclusion, equality, and uplifting every voice on the other side, that inside of that tension lies the rabbi shortage, because it used to be that rabbis were the 1%, that you only did this job if you were excellent at text and they really deemed you. But now, like any old person who wants to be a rabbi, we want everybody in the door. Let them all in, gosh, we need more rabbis. So, and he said, if that's going to be the standard, then who wants to do that? People actually want to do a job that requires excellence. I don't know if I buy that. When I heard him say that, I thought, I think people don't want to be rabbis because they're afraid of not being able to be themselves once they get ordained. And they'll go to synagogues, and the synagogue will tell them, you can say this, but you can't say this. You can, the joke was always like, Rabbi, we want you to come and revolutionize the synagogue. Come in, change the service, but not a Adon Olam. Yeah, but also not the way we do the Amidah. We need that to, and just one by one, chip away at anything the rabbi might do to actually meaningfully change the experience of being at shul. And you're like, what kind of fun is that? That's not creative. And David said when he wrote to all of us with the questions, look, we planned this panel long before October 7th. I'm not going to ask you any questions about Israel, but I think we can't not say that there is an increasing chasm between the generations when it comes to Israel. Young rabbis, or young rabbinical students, prospective rabbinical students, are further to the left. We know this from statistics. This is, it's not controversial to say this. We know this. And when you get out into the world, you are told what is within bounds to say and to not say. And I think for many young prospective rabbis, they're like, if I can't authentically speak, if I can't be myself, why would I go into this job? Isn't authenticity actually a really important part of being a good rabbi? I can't count the number of times somebody has said to me, one of the things I like about Mishkan, Rabbi Lizzi, is that I feel like you're the same person on the bima as you are when I have a conversation with you. Like, I don't feel like you're pretending up there to be a different kind of person or like more moral or more spiritual or something. Like, I kind of feel like you're just you. And that's true. I actually made a point of creating a community in which I didn't have to pretend. That's a benefit of creating your own community. You can build it around, your own strengths. Like, I wanted to play guitar in shul. I wanted to do that, so I get to do that. And any other number of things. But even I, in the shul that I created, am feeling the strains of this right now. So I think that that's a big part of it. I'm sure there are other dynamics too, but I think that's a really important piece of it.
I agree 100%. And your authenticity, who you are as a rabbi when you're rabbiing, was such an inspiration to me. And I, in my career, have gone to school on you. Seriously, you've given me permission to be me as a rabbi and taught me how to do that and what that sounds like and what it looks like. So there is no prospective rabbi shortage. There is a job, there is a salary shortage in the work that these prospective rabbis want to do. If SVARA said we are ready to ordain, we would have hundreds of people lining up to be rabbis ordained by SVARA. But we would have to tell them, you're not going to make a living, not for the next generation or maybe 2 or maybe 3, that you are going to be rabbis like the wood choppers and the water carriers and the shoemakers of the early rabbinic period, when you're going to have to figure out how to make a living, and you're going to rabbi on the side, and you're going to raise up communities and figure out what Judaism is going to look like the way they did. And that's a very tough sell, but I think that's the future we're looking at. I think we're looking at a non-professional, unpaid rabbinic era.
Wow.
Sorry. Sorry.
I'm very happily employed here, guys.
And I think that should bring us to the funding questions.
Well,
Okay, or wherever you want to go, David, it's fine.
I only ad-lib so well, okay?
Okay, sorry.
But I think that's...
At some point, let's get at how we're going to fund this unrecognizable Jewish future.
I want to talk about vision, and I don't think you can get to funding without vision. So I hope there's a through line here. And I'll start with you, Lizzie, and it's the same question for you, Benay. I'll start with Jacob at some point. You had a vision for Mishkan before there were Mishkanites, on day 1 or day 0. So I'm curious how you got to that vision. But I'm more interested in how you remain loyal to that vision, and here's the money, because we all rely on members and donors who may or may not understand that vision. And the question isn't so much about educating your community and how you adapt that vision hand in hand with the community, but how do you remain loyal, because we all need to avoid being everything to everyone.
That's such a good question. So when I was at ECAR in Los Angeles, that was my first rabbinic job, and they gave me the role of doing community organizing with the local community organizing, faith-based community organizing network, which was mostly organizing churches, but like we were a synagogue organizing with them. So I went to the PICO training, like the name of the organization was PICO, so I went and learned, basic principles of community organizing. You talk to individuals, you get a sense of what is their pain point, what bothers them, why, what is the pain of their life. You talk to enough individuals, and then you get a sense of a story of a neighborhood, community, whatever it is, and then you help people understand that together they actually have a more likely chance of solving the problem if they put pressure, if they strategize together, than as a bunch of atomized individuals who maybe didn't even realize that other people shared the same problem. And so I learned that model there as it applied to community organizing. But as I realized that inside of myself, I was feeling less and less interested in continuing to live in LA and more interested in returning to Chicago, I think there's like some kind of homing device that's implanted in the, brains of kids who grow up here, because I know I'm not the only person who, we went, we left, we lived in some amazing places. I lived in Northern California, Southern California, Israel, and I wanted to come back to Chicago. I wanted the winters, I wanted the boots, I wanted the hat, I wanted to be near my parents. And then as I described to you, I started calling friends, and I did those conversations. Where do you go? What's, and then when they would say nowhere, then I would say, well, what do you do about your spiritual life? And their answer would be what spiritual life? Because I feel like that's actually not a conversation that many liberal Jews have. What's your relationship with God like? How do you pray? Do you ever learn Jewish things? Do you ever do Shabbat? Where do you celebrate holidays? A lot of them would go home and do high holidays with their families, but they didn't actually practice Judaism. They intended fully when they had kids one day to practice Judaism again, but in the meantime, vast desert of 20s and 30s, and they were what's there for me? So that for me was the founding, there's a community here of people who don't think Judaism has anything for them, is not spiritual, and are young adults. These were people my age. And I read a lot of studies. There was the JUF did a study in 2010 about sort of Jews in Chicago and where people lived and, affiliation and all of this stuff. The conservative movement had just released some studies. It turns out fewer than 10% of people under 40, at that time at least, were affiliated with any synagogue. So synagogues are supposed to be the places where you do Jewish spirituality, and you have all of these young adults who are no thanks, not there for me. So that for me was kind of the calling, was okay, there is a large community of primarily young adults who don't feel a sense of, Judaism being spiritual. I will create that. I will be the rabbi for those people. And so what that means is the dynamics, the social dynamics, demographics, social trends of that community have to matter to me. And I have to go in not thinking, how can I change them? How can I make them less likely to intermarry? How can I make them more pro-Israel? These are some of the agendas of the institutional Jewish world was very troubled by rates of intermarriage. At that time, the conservative movement in which I was ordained was not permitting rabbis, they still don't, to perform intermarriages. I think there is definitely this sense of impending doom and crisis about the widening gap between young adults, attachment to Israel and the older generation. And a sense of we have to teach them. We have to, we have to bring them in, and then we have to give them the information. And I was sort of or we could just create community and do Judaism and not, not impose, some of those, the most some of the most like the most identity-based things that actually like animate people, not tell them that they're wrong and bad Jews. So that was the beginning, and I sort of pride myself and talk about how we, like, in the early days, we had somebody who was like the Midwest regional director of APAC, helped start Mishkan, had our second service in his living room. And we had like a whole gaggle of young adults involved in JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, and the whole spectrum in between of people who would never share space together in any other Jewish context. But the context in which we were coming together was joy. It was like Judaism practiced as joy. And that remains my vision. I'm like, that's it, I don't want the community to be split down lines of whether you are Zionist enough or not, whether you are anti-Zionist enough or not. I mean, there are new litmus tests for what kind of Jew belongs and should be outside the pale. And I'm so uninterested in that conversation, in that litmus testing. I'm more interested in practicing Judaism in a way that enables people to meet each other, encounter each other, discover that, oh, you think about that in that way? That's interesting. I think about it quite differently. But now that I'm here in a conversation with you, I can treat you like a person and not like a caricature of your, of your viewpoint. And I've seen it happen, but it requires real commitment on the part of the people who opt in. And so what I have found is it's hard. It's really hard, and it is made much harder in the backdrop of moments of crisis, and what some people feel right now is like existential crisis for the state of Israel, which then translates into a feeling of existential crisis for Jewish people who, are watching and connected to the state of Israel. And it, there's a lot more to say there, but tensions run so high, and there is such a deep sense of, I think, fear, that we may lose everything, I'm like some fears that feel rational and some fears that I'm like, my God, where is this coming from? But you know where it's coming from. It's coming from generations and generations and generations of trauma and loss and persecution and, all over the world. And so I get it. How do we maintain a diverse community against that backdrop? Some people are not interested in that, as I have discovered in the last couple of months. That's actually not where they want to be. And for some people, it's incredibly comforting. So, on the funding question, I think we will lose some funding. I know that we already have over this vision. And what can I say? This is my animating vision. So, if anybody wants to donate, our mishkanchicago.org/donate. Anyway.
Same question.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I agree with you 100%.
Thank you, Benay. I needed that.
Oh my God. Yes. Joining you in losing funding. Also SVARA.org/donate. Yeah, I think the communities that we've created that are successful are the ones where the founder and the leaders are sticking to their vision and trusting their vision, trusting that what they needed, lots of people need. And at the end of the day, we're going to lose funders, but we will ultimately succeed when we serve the needs of the people we're trying to serve. I'll give you a little story, a funding story and a vision versus funding story. Okay. I searched through my email this morning to remind myself, when did this happen? It was 2016. SVARA started in 2003. You remember this story, I'm sure. I was hoping you would tell the story. Yeah. And one of the blessings of being committed to calling ourselves a queer yeshiva, using the word queer, in 2003, was that nobody would fund us. And the blessing of not getting funding is that you don't have tension over pleasing your funders and giving them what they want and hitting numbers, and you can spend time crafting and burnishing and honing your vision in your product without that tension. So it was 13 years until we got our first grant, and you'll remember this as well, first big grant, and I'm not going to name the funder, but you all know the funder. It was a $300,000 grant. Now, I want to set the scene. I'm a single mom. I'm working 3 jobs. I'm funding SVARA. And my credit cards are maxed out. I don't know where my next mortgage payment is going to come from. And we get a $300,000 grant. And the funder, we meet with them, we're working up what was it for? It was to revolutionize supplementary Hebrew schools. How? By taking college, graduate, young Svaraniks who knew how to learn in the SVARA method and create SVARA method Batei Midrash for Hebrew school kids. And these 20-somethings would be teaching them in Hebrew schools around the country. It was a slam dunk for us. It would have been phenomenally successful, if I do say so myself. And we got the grant. And we met with the funder, and they said, okay, let's decide on the marketing language to recruit the fellows who would be doing this. And they said, well, you know that you can't accept anyone into this fellowship who has any social media presence supporting JVP. In other words, their Israel politics, you're going to have to investigate, and if they have politics beyond these lines, they can't be part of this program. Long story short, we finally get to the head guy of this funding organization who says, oh, no, it's not just JVP. You can't have anyone in this fellowship who supports who objects to the occupation. I said, I couldn't even run this project. And so we gave them their check back. If we had not given them their check back, SVARA would have died. It would have stopped being what it was and what it is now. Okay, shameless brag. Okay, maybe in 2016 we had 1,000 students, maybe 500. Because we stuck to our vision and remained a place where, regardless of your politics on Israel, and regardless of your politics on anything else, you were wanted and loved. SVARA had 54,000 students last year. So, fortunately, I think that the message is stick to your vision, even though you're not sure where your next, mortgage payment is going to come from, and you will be successful. We probably have one funder. Of all the funders that we now have, we probably have one funder who gets us and who funds us because of what we're about. The other funders fund us because we give them what they want, which is engagement. We're happy to give them, right? But the Jewish future needs the Medicis who funded the Renaissance, the individuals who are not going to fund you for 3 years and then say, you replace our funding, who are going to fund for 3 generations. If you look at how we funded the Jewish revolution that is America now, the Jewish schools, hospitals, to give the Jewish doctors who had no place to practice medicine, and so on. They weren't funding for 3 years. They weren't writing a check for 3 years and then said, okay, then you're on your own. They were funding for generations. That's the kind of funding that we need for the future.
Thank you. Jacob, I'm interested in how you created your vision since you were already at Camp Ramah before, and there was already a vision in place that was really successful. And so how did you create your vision, and at what point did you realize that people were coming along with your vision?
part of my Jonah story is that my predecessor, Rabbi David Soloff, visionary leader, very successful, great guy. Rabbi Soloff tried to talk me out of this job for years. Mostly the line was, Jacob, you're an educator. You like ideas. This job isn't what you think it is. And Rabbi Soloff also, I will say, I believe history repeats itself, and I believe that every generation has its own founding narratives and crucial aspects of shaping outlook. And part of me, I mean, just to give you a sense here, my father worked for Rabbi Soloff as a division head in his first few summers as director, and then I was a camper and staff member and division head at the end of his tenure. That's how long he was around for. May he live and be well. And he kept his politics very close to his chest. I have a sense of his domestic and Israel politics, but I have actually never heard them, having worked very closely with him and seeing myself as one of his students. And that's one of the things you learn as his student, that you're not going to get access to this stuff. And I knew from day one that was never going to work for me. And so part of my own story here is that I was asked to like clip my wings and shut up and sit in the corner and don't be so loud by a generation of lay leaders and by the professional head of the organization. And that was challenging and difficult and part of what I very much bristled against for years. And I think part of what I really learned from Rabbi Soloff is that the vision is the community. And one of my, we can get into this or not, but like one of my questions for these would-be rabbis is your pulpit about your ideas or is your pulpit about the people? So like what I'm hearing quite beautifully from Lizzie is kind of like what I would take, which is the people who show up are the community, right? And like, yes, I have a legacy organization. We have major fundraising needs. Thank God we're generally able to meet them. I give a lot of people what they want. And I feel like I have integrity with my ideas and my beliefs about what happens. And I know that the organization, through the 40s on today, Israel's been an almost constant generational challenge. In the early years, the older generation were the anti-Zionists and didn't want you to move to Israel. And the young kids wanted Zionism and were going to move to Israel. That shifted and changed in different ways over time. Gender, sexuality, civil rights, race, U.S. nationalism, Israel, like these are through lines that all feel very live right now, but that have been dealt with by predecessors of my board and predecessors of myself. And so, I mean, I'll share this story. I had a very painful encounter. I think it was 2018 or 2019. It was just as the Supreme Court was beginning to dial back Roe. And a young Jewish leader, a woman, relevant for the story, at some point like sat me down, been a member of our senior team at camp for 4 or 5 years already, sat me down and said, Jacob, I've had it. I cannot be in a place where my right to my own body is in question. And I don't know exactly what was going on. She heard maybe young staff talking about something. I don't know what it was. And I sat her down, and I think in a way that Lizzie might, though maybe not, I was like, look, I'm with you. And abortion is a live conversation in America and in Jewish law. It's not so simple. And so if you need to be in a place where it's not a live question, this camp is not the right place for you. And if there are people who disagree with you politically, for whom this is their camp too. And we have to figure out what that looks like with menschlichkeit and with other things. And I don't have a uterus. I named that in the space. You know, like these are important factors as well. And what does it mean for an older white cis hetero guy to like have this conversation with a woman in their mid to late 20s? I think for me that vision is about having my own opinions, some very strong opinions, but really recognizing a humility vis-a-vis the broader community and wanting to hold opinions that I sometimes find anathema and I often disagree with in other people that are part of that community. And one of the pieces for me, and one of the things I'm thinking about a lot today as we get ready for a summer where Israelis and Americans are going to be together at a time when I think it's going to be more difficult for Israelis and Americans to be together because we're in very different places in terms of dealing with the very different traumas we've experienced in the last few months, and also thinking about, or I would suggest, I don't think most Israelis are ready to think about problem solving and next steps. I think American Jews and Israeli Jews have very different needs and priorities right now. And I think that's about our lived world, is I'm thinking about empathy. And I love many of the veteran Israelis we have in camp, and I have a commitment to appreciate empathically the Israelis who are in camp this summer. And I'm really worried that because of that empathy, we can't talk about anything. All the things that we need desperately to talk about. And so I'm really struggling with that, and I'm concerned about that as we head into this upcoming summer. But there's a piece here that's real, and it's about the real people. And that's why, like, if we're looking for an unfunded, non-professional rabbinate, that's great. I just hope they get to the Jews in Birmingham.
It's not that I'm looking for that. I just think that's what we're in for.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I'd love a funded rabbinate.
But
Yeah.
I look, I guess for me, there's a good portion of my board right now that's really anxious about the conservative movement for good reason. It's a rational anxiety. And one of the things that I keep telling them is that the fears about the movement are real, and they're long in coming, and I wish we could change them, all sorts of things. But the conservative movement, in this way, in a great way, has very little to do with conservative synagogues. That's part of the Achilles heel of the movement. But our conservative synagogues are not going anywhere. The vast majority of the conservative synagogues in the Midwest are not going anywhere. And what I'm concerned about with this rabbinic pipeline thing is those shows will not have rabbis. And that is a great fear for me. And I'll say, Benay, I don't know if you seem to be getting ready to say something, which you will. But I don't know if I'm going to anticipate your question or not. Part of what solves the rabbinic pipeline is a dramatic shift in how the lay leaders of liberal synagogues view their staff. And I say this on behalf of my good friend David and on behalf of lots of other rabbis, but part of the problem, boards need to operate from a position of scarcity and a concern that if this rabbi doesn't work out, you don't know if you're getting another one. And that has to change work-life balance. It has to change how we think about salary and benefit compensation. It has to think how we deal with your legitimate feelings about the sermon on Shabbat morning or the eulogy at your loved one's funeral or whatever else is going on. All of those things, because that shift, I don't think it's the biggest part, but is part of the challenge that we're facing.
I was just going to say, it's not that I'm unconcerned about the conservative congregations who may not have rabbis. I'm much more concerned about the far more numerous Jews who are not going to a synagogue who will not have rabbis or will not have leaders to bring them into the messing with of our tradition and the using of our tradition to make their lives better.
But there's some grassroots, shifting happening here. So I'm no longer part of the Rabbinical Assembly of the Conservative Movement. I was ordained in 2010, and I stayed for 3 years, and I just got so tired of saying no to people who were asking me, a rabbi, to do their weddings and to, join their lives so that they could be part of the Jewish community. And so eventually I, turned in my membership card, and I happily, joyfully, I love doing intermarriages because I feel like we are building the Jewish community full of people who are asking to be part of it. I will tell you, like, over half of the people for whom I do weddings end up converting, because they just decide that it's so nice to be in a community that actually welcomes and affirms them and doesn't require them to be somebody other than they already are. And then once the doors open, it's like, oh, but it's actually nice in here. I like it. You guys are fun. So I've been moved mentally homeless for like a decade, and moved mentally homeless. Yeah, and the Jewish Emergent Network is one example of a network of people who've just gravitated toward one another, because it's like we're all kind of, outcasts from our various movements, and we're all doing things a little bit differently. We're not doing it the same kind of differently, but we all kind of we share an ethos. Let's, make a network, run retreats for ourselves and each other, teach each other Torah, have a sense of fellowship, camaraderie, call each other when we're going through things. I recently went to the conference for renewal rabbis to see if this maybe was my, maybe my movemental home. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, I don't know. I think they're fun, but they do have a rabbinical school that's growing. Maybe the only one in the country that's growing. Two. I'm going to repeat what you said so that
I'm pretty sure Chabad and Ner Yisrael have also
100%,
seen
yes.
enrollment growth, so I
That
just
is
want to
so
be
important.
wary of.
Yes. Against the backdrop of a shrinking liberal community and a growing Orthodox community. We're not talking about Orthodox Judaism. We're here talking about non-Orthodox Judaism. So all the rabbinical schools are contracting, and there is a serious question about how they're going to, the whole thing. And the Renewal, Reconstructionist, and Hebrew College are growing. And relevantly, Hebrew College is non-denominational. Renewal doesn't really consider itself a movement, though at some point you need a structure that, actually supports rabbis connecting with each other, and maybe, a 401k plan or something that, all of the markers of an institution. And if they don't wildly succeed, it'll be because they don't embrace the need for sort of the infrastructure of institution building, which is, I think, where a lot of the charismatic, smart, motivated young rabbis who want to be leaders might, hit a wall, which is at that point of creating the infrastructure to actually house the innovation and the creativity that, it would be amazing to spread. But, you for a long time were just doing this kind of by your lonesome. Not everybody would stick it out for as long as you did, with the kind of selfless giving of yourself, your time, your money to put your dream into the world. Most people can't afford that, and you can't tread water forever. And so I do think that's, part of the conversation is that the movements themselves are constraining and not speaking to people anymore, but there are people who want the thing that the movements used to provide, and we need new structures for holding it.
One of my skills is knowing when the bagels start smelling better. So real quickly, we'll end kind of a lightning round. What are the things that are exciting you that are coming out of your institutions?
Kids and young adults and families. I mean, our Steve Yastro's here. About 12 years ago, we engaged Steve for help with our market research sales. Our camp was under-enrolled for about 10 years after the Great Recession. And since COVID, our enrollment has been well up. We struggled for a few years with staff hiring. Staff hiring appears to be getting easier as the labor market shifts happen, and I think October 7th, unfortunately, is helping us hold on to American staff for at least another summer or two. We'll see how those trends go. Our day camp staffing has been very solid. Whatever, it doesn't matter. We're impacting kids. And look, Jewish summer camps work. All Jewish summer camps work because they recreate ethnic neighborhoods of the post-World War II era. A camp like Camp Ramah, Wisconsin is different than most camps because we don't end at recreating the ethnic. We add Torah and vibrant Jewish living like some other camps do. But the truth is most Jewish camps, that's what they do, and that's why they work at intermarriage and all these other things. Jews become friends with each other, and we create some of that population density that some of you grew up in that our kids don't really have today. And we're seeing the results of that. And it's a failure when kids live 10 months a year for their Jewish life of a month or two over the summer. And so part of this is recognizing strong synagogues, a new generation of innovative young rabbis, not so young, David. And he called me his old camp director, as camp counselor, and all of that stuff. And we're seeing that happen, and that gives me great hope for the future.
I think what I'm most excited about is the increasing edge of the formerly marginalized Jews and Jewish adjacent folk who are seeing places where they can enter the tradition and be a part of it. The disability justice community. I think what we're going to see in the future is neurodivergent Torah. 62% of the 54,000 people who came to SVARA last year identify as having a disability or as neurodivergent. And what they're seeing in the tradition, the donkey stories that are jumping out at them, I'm referencing the idea that if you're a donkey and you're learning Torah, the donkey stories are going to, jump out at you. You're going to notice where the donkeys are. Oh, that's me, because you see yourself. The rest of us don't even notice the donkeys. These people are seeing in our tradition and in Torah just phenomenal stuff. And just like the demographic explosion of queer and trans folk, right, 64%. If you have a kid under 20 years old, you know that half their classmates identify as queer. The neurodiverse community is exploding, and their Torah is totally dope.
I'm excited about a lot of things. I guess, the thing that excites me is, or one thing that excites me, because I look at what Jacob is doing, and literally, you brought me to tears talking about the original founding purpose of Camp Ramah. And I think there's a sense that the most important time to cultivate young Jewish minds and identities is early, is young adulthood, or childhood, camp, great, but then it's okay, but not only that, because, what if they get woken up in their teens? And so we have teen trips and, youth groups and that kind of thing. But then it's okay, well, you go to college and maybe you'll get turned on in Hillel, and there's a ton of institutional investment, from big foundations, legacy, for long stretches of time, not asking these places to turn it off after 3 years and find your own funding, but to just appreciate the importance of Jewish education and identity formation at all of these young stages along the way. And then you get to synagogues, and it's a little bit all right, great, you should be membership funded now. The funding world is a little bit okay, now you're all grown up, so figure it out. But what I have seen is that as adults, people can also discover Judaism as if for the first time, and rediscover Judaism because, camp experience wasn't what they were looking for, or they didn't have a camp experience, or they didn't grow up Jewish. There are any number of reasons why a person as an adult might have a resistance to walking into a shul to look for their answers or their spiritual practice. But then they do and can actually find it, and find it deeply meaningful, and it can be transformational. And so that's kind of the business I'm in. Mishkan does have a Mensch Academy, a place where we're cultivating young minds. And, it's basically a religious school. But seriously, the work that really gets me excited is doing this with adults, because that's actually the majority of your life. And I think that there's so much room for, tshuva maybe isn't the right word exactly, turning, changing, evolving, growing. But we don't have to be the same people at age 30 that we were at age 25. We don't have to be the same people at age 50 that we were at age 35. And our Judaism can evolve with that. And that's fun and interesting. And I think that actually has real implications for what Jewish community looks like, because it won't look the same, and it shouldn't look the same as it did 15 years ago or 50 years ago. And actually, there are some people who enjoy that and want that. And there should be community for people who want that. And for those of us that are kind of adapting, growing, sort of rolling with the punches of the evolving world, it's hard, because actually change is hard sometimes too, and certainly institutions resist change. The more institutionalized you get, it's hard, because people actually get used to a certain thing and then don't want it to change. But it's still exciting to me that adults, basically once you're done with your Hillel experience or never had one, that there's this whole wide open space where we get to play. And I think that's fun.
Thank you. So I want to thank Jacob, Benay, and Lizzie. You can thank them too. It feels silly to write closing remarks ahead of time, but I'll just say I'm so humbled to have been up here and to hear your Torah, your wisdom, and what is shaping your communities to be so impactful and powerful. And I'll say, super nervous here, but I know that there's also a vulnerability in standing up or sitting up here and talking about your institution, not solely from your perspective, but impacted by the people you're sharing the stage. So I appreciate that vulnerability and that willingness to bring your full selves. Thank you. Without you, there is no Mercaz. I said it's a place where we want to center ideas around people. It's fine to have ideas, but with no people, there is no Mercaz. Mercaz means center. So thank you for being here. And just to plug, stay tuned for the content that we're going to be putting out. We have a podcast coming out, and our next live in-person event will be April 14th with Rabbi Josh Fagelson and Dan Liebenson and Judy Finkelstein-Taff. So I hope you'll come to that and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.